Hello, dear friends. And there was evening and there was morning, day 9. We are speaking about the ninth day of our Russian aggression against Ukraine today, and I'm giving you, as always, short updates on the situation from on the ground here. Lviv, the westernmost city of Ukraine, close to the border with Poland, is filled with three types of people: refugees, those locals that stayed, who usually work with volunteering organizations and organize some support either for the refugees or for the army, and Western journalists. There are so many Western journalists here as probably never before. Even during the the Euro Soccer Cup in 2012, I think there were less journalists than these days, which is understandable. I chose this illustration for my today's video. This is actually the cover of the Economist journal, showing Ukrainian flag with blood, as you can see. And it's not only because of the war, but it's mainly because the scenario of this war is getting more and more brutal, especially on civilians. And that explains also the large spike in the number of refugees from eastern and central and southern Ukraine. Yesterday I reported about these terrible events at the nuclear power plant. Today the situation there somehow stabilized. We don't know how it will develop because Russians are still in control basically of the nuclear power plant, but the personnel is at least taking care of the crucial processes in the reactors, and we hope that somehow the situation is under control. At least this is what is reported from there. But unfortunately, very heavy bombings and shellings continue. In this picture, which struck me and probably will strike you, you can see civilians hiding under a bridge, basically a half-destroyed bridge. The civilians were preparing for evacuation, but then there was alarm system that sounded and they had to hide in the shelter that is basically not a good shelter, of course, if the bomb hits there. But that's what people have to go through during this very difficult evacuation process. When I speak of evacuation, it's also something that is very confusing nowadays, because Ukrainian authorities try to evacuate all the civilians that want evacuation from heavy fighting areas, especially from the towns and cities that are being shelled especially intensively. But there were some, so the problem is that fighting is going on and the bombings and shellings are almost ceaseless. So they had to negotiate, our authorities had to negotiate with the Russians for some humanitarian corridors from various cities, which was promised, but then when civilians gathered, the place of the civilian gathering was shelled with rockets. Luckily, the local authorities were very careful and not many civilians were gathered in one spot. So we somehow avoided mass casualties at this point. Especially horrible humanitarian situation is in the south of Ukraine, in the city of Mariupol, over the Azov Sea. It's the key port of the Azov Sea from Ukrainian side, and it's the last stronghold of Ukrainian troops in that small region. If Russians take it over, then they will have a corridor, long desired for corridor from Russian border through southern Ukraine to Crimea Peninsula. That's why they have thrown all their strength, all their military power in the southern Ukraine to take over that city. The city is very heavily bombed with all the civilians trapped inside. There are Ukrainian troops inside that bravely defend the city, and they beg for the civilians to leave. The Ukrainian government is begging the Russian military commanders to allow for a green corridor. It was promised today in the morning, but it did not happen. Instead, they got more heavy shellings and bombardments. So the humanitarian situation is terrible, because for 3 or 4 days they have no electricity, water supply, communications, heat, and the city needs break in this siege to at least take care of most fundamental infrastructural needs of the city, and for the civilians to leave. This picture also was quite impressive when I saw it today. You don't know whether to laugh or to cry when you see it. It's a mother who probably belongs to a local self-defense unit, escorting her daughter to some shelter or to a bus to be taken out of the city. It speaks for itself, I think. Today is March the 5th, and it's the day of Stalin's death. And there is a lot of talk in Ukrainian media that how great would it be if this would be also the day when Putin dies. This is the cruel humor of the wartime, and people, there are some memorable pictures from the United States in the 1953, and Ukrainian and Russian immigrants were celebrating the death of Stalin with treating people with free borscht, as you can see here, national Ukrainian kind of soup, vegetable soup. And this is a modern picture, kind of replica of that historical one, hinting to the analogy between Stalin's death and the desire for Putin's death. One of the key issues of Russian propaganda, which is being voiced again and again, even today in Putin's address to the nation, again he mentioned that it's Nazis in Ukraine that are the cause of this war. The ethnically Jewish president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is a supposed Nazi, and here we see more Nazis praying at in Jerusalem at the famous wall, wrapped in Ukrainian flags. Unfortunately, only Israeli citizens support Ukraine, not Israeli government. As our president put it today, the president of Israel is not wrapped in Ukrainian flag. Israel still denies some essential weapons to be exported to Ukraine, defensive weapons that are needed for closing our sky, and Israel gives refuge to Russian oligarchs, Russian politicians and their families. There are just few countries in the world they can escape to, and now we are witnessing this massive escape campaign from Russia, where key politicians, key businessmen and oligarchs are taking their families and their assets. But where to take them if the whole Western world is closed? So they take them to Israel, to Georgia, some of them to China, and some other shady third world countries with no rule of law, where they can hide temporarily and wait for better times to legalize their capitals in the West again, possibly. So unfortunately, Israel is supporting that. But as for Jews and Jewish people, we feel that strong support Some Jewish memorials in Kyiv were damaged during the rocket strikes, especially the famous Baben Yar, a place of execution of thousands and thousands of Ukrainians and Jews during the World War II by the Nazis. The very memorial and the very cemetery was hit by the rocket. And also yesterday we saw, or 2 days before, we saw a heartbreaking video from the Kyiv underground where the survivors of the Holocaust, very old ladies of Jewish ethnicity, recorded a video like cursing Putin for defending them from Nazis and for making them, being in their 90s, to climb down to the metro stations like 100 meters before the surface of the earth to hide from Russian rockets. So these are my mixed, probably sporadic thoughts on the situation. Nothing changed. NATO, which held a meeting yesterday, still decided to stay away from Ukrainian situation, basically not to close the sky, not to provide military planes, military jets to Ukrainian army, in the fear of being involved in this conflict directly and fueling the World War III, as they put it. I won't judge the justice of those claims. I'm sure the situation is very complicated and sensitive, but we need support. We need your support, your moral, spiritual support, your financial support if possible. And we need you to tell your governments, to raise the awareness in the Western societies that what is going on is probably the biggest atrocity, certainly in Europe after the World War II. It's real genocide, because what's going on now is this shelling of Ukrainian cities is not long ago. It changed from hitting military targets to a very systematic bombing of civilian residential quarters, and this is something that needs to stop, because the number of casualties rockets the sky. It's becoming by hour larger and larger. Our troops fight very bravely. So many Russian fighter jets and helicopters have been brought down. Number of pilots were taken alive after they catapulted from their hit jets, and those are the worst war criminals of all, because if ordinary foot soldiers are obviously not always very successful and they have not killed anyone, the pilots that are captured by our army are guilty of the death of dozens and dozens of civilians, destroying schools, orphanages, critical infrastructural objects. Many of them have been traced to their internet accounts, and some documents were retrieved from them, who they are, the identity papers, and it seems like many of them have participated also in the Syrian campaign. You all probably remember this horrific pictures from Aleppo, from various other Syrian cities that were just wiped out of the face of the earth. And all that blood of civilians and children is on their hands. And now they are basically realizing the same scenario in Ukraine. Luckily, our troops resisted quite effectively, but we need more of that resistance internally and internationally, and we need your governments, to enable our army to resist, to fight this genocidal, murderous Russian army with all its force, as far as we can do it on the ground here with the help of technological weapons. Thank you for your support again. Please donate to various Ukrainian organizations, funds that raise money for the medical needs of Ukrainian people and army, for the army needs. We will be grateful for that, and supporting us, you support the order and safety, security in Europe and in the world today. Thank you very much.